Raul Alberto da Fresca Aguilera Jr.,
Brian G. Ahern,
Jeremiah Joseph Ahern,
Joanne Marie Adeolas,
Shabir Ahmed,
Terrence Andre Aiken,
Godwin O. Ajala,
Trudy Alagero,
Andrew Alamino,
Margaret Ann Alario,
Gary M. Abero,
John Leslie Albert,
Peter Craig Alderman,
and my uncle Charles William Garbarini.
my brother-in-law Sal Edward Terry Jr., may you rest in peace. Your sister Faith still misses you to this date. You've been a guiding light and a hero always to this date. Thank you very much.
Jacqueline Delane Aldridge Frederick,
David D. Alger,
Ernest Ali Kakos,
Edward L. Allegretto,
Eric Allen,
Joseph Ryan Allen,
Richard Dennis Allen,
Richard L. Allen,
Christopher E. Allingham,
Anna S. W. Allison,
Janet Marie Alonso,
Anthony Alvarado,
Antonio Javier Alvarez,
Victoria Alvarez Brito,
Telmo E. Alvear,
Cesar Amaranto Alviar,
Tariq Amanula,
Angelo Amaranto,
James M. Amato,
Joseph Amatuccio,
Paul W. Ambrose,
Christopher Charles Amoroso,
Craig Scott Amundsen,
Kazuhiro Anai,
Calixto Anaya Jr.,
Joseph P. Anchundia,
Kermit Charles Anderson,
Yvette Constance Anderson,
John Jack Andriacchio,
Michael Rourke Andrews,
Jean Ann Andrucki,
Sue Nia Ang,
Joseph Angelini Sr.,
Joseph John Angelini Jr.,
David Lawrence Angel,
Mary Lynn Edwards Angel,
Laura Angeletta,
Doreen J. Angersani,
Lorraine Antigua,
Sama David Aoyama,
and my father, Kevin James Murphy. I love you very much, Dad, and I know you're looking down at me with a big, big smile on your face today. I love you.
and my uncle and my hero, New York City firefighter and United States Marine, Matthew David Garvey. We love and miss you, Uncle Matt.
Peter Paul Apollo,
Faustino Apostol Jr.,
Frank Thomas Aquilino,
Patrick Michael Anyos,
David Gregory Arache,
Michael George Arjinsky,
Louis Arena,
Barbara Jean Arstegui,
Adam P. Arias,
Michael J. Armstrong,
Jack Charles Aaron,
Joshua Todd Aaron,
Richard Avery Arano,
Myra Joy Aronson,
Japhet Jesse Arie,
Carl Francis Asaro,
Michael A. Asiak,
Michael Edward Asher,
Janice Marie Ashley,
Thomas J. Ashton,
Manuel O. Asantimbe,
Greg A. Atlas,
Gerald Thomas Atwood,
James Audifred,
Louis F. Aversano Jr.,
Ezra Avidas,
Sandy Ayala,
Arlene T. Babiquitas,
Eustace R. Bacchus,
John J. Badagliaca,
Jane Ellen Basler,
Robert J. Bearwalter,
Andrew J. Bailey,
Brett T. Bailey,
Garnet Ace Bailey,
Tatiana Bakalinskaya,
Michael S. Bashk,
Sharon M. Malcolm,
Michael Andrew Bain.
Catherine Bantis.
And my brother, Joseph Michael Giacconi.
And
His family, his friends will never forget. I come here every year for 16 years to make sure I hear his name so that I can honor him and make sure that he will never be forgotten.
and my grandfather, Howard Selwyn.
Gerard Batiste.
Walter Barron.
Gerard A. Barbera.
Paul Vincent Barbaro.
James William Barbella.
Victor Daniel Barbosa.
Christine Joanna Barbuda.
Colleen Ann Barco.
David Michael Barkway.
Matthew Barnes.
Melissa Rose Barnes.
Sheila Patricia Barnes.
Evan J. Barone.
Renee Barrett Arjun.
Arthur Thaddeus Barry.
Diane G. Barry.
Maurice Vincent Barry.
Scott D. Bart.
Carlton W. Bartels.
Guy Barsby.
Ina B. Lassina.
Alicia Christine Burton Bajmajan.
Who am I? I'm sorry. Kenneth William Besnicki.
Stephen Joseph Bates.
Paul James Battaglia.
W. David Bauer.
Ivan Louis Caprio Batusta.
Marlon Capito Bautista.
Mark Lawrence Bevis.
Jasper Baxter.
Lorraine B. G. Bay.
Michelle Beal.
Todd M. Beamer.
Paul Frederick Bettini.
Jane S. Beatty.
Alan Anthony Beaven.
Lawrence Ira Beck.
Minette Marie Beckles.
Carl John Vadigian.
Michael Ernest Beekman.
Kevin Joseph Smith.
And my brother, Kevin Patrick York. We will always remember your enduring devotion to family, your unyielding support for your network of friends, your compassion for others that led to your generosity, your animated debates fueled by new knowledge, your wit and humor that helped lighten any mood, and finally, your affection for America and your passion for history. Continue to guide us with your energetic spirit. May God bless you.
And my oldest son, Noel, who was in the second tower. I miss you every day. We all miss you. And thank you for your prayers to help us get by. Thank you.
Maria A. Bear.
Max J. Bilkey.
Yelena Bililovsky.
Nina Patrice Bell.
Debbie S. Bellows.
Stephen Elliott Belson.
Paul M. Benedetti.
Denise Lenore Benedetto.
Brian Craig Bennett.
Eric L. Bennett.
Oliver Bennett.
Margaret L. Benson.
Dominic J. Berardi.
James Patrick Berger.
Stephen Howard Berger.
John P. Bergen.
Alvin Bergson.
Daniel David Bergstein.
Graham Andrew Berkeley.
Michael J. Berkeley.
Donna M. Bernards.
David W. Bernard.
William H. Bernstein.
David M. Beret.
David Shelby Berry.
Joseph John Berry.
William Reed Becky.
Yanene Beatru.
Timothy D. Betterly.
Carolyn Mayer Bug.
Edward Frank Bea.
Paul Michael Bayer.
Anil Taliram Bahavarni.
Bella J. Buchan,
Shimmy D. Biegelisen,
Peter Alexander Bielfeld,
William G. Biggert,
Ryan Eugene Bilcher,
Mark Bingham,
Carl Vincent Beanie,
and my grandmother, Ruth Sheila Lapin. Grammy Ruth, I wish more than anything that I could have met you. I know that you were a wonderful person, and I love hearing stories about you from my parents. Thank you so much for raising my mom to be the amazing person that she is. I'm very proud to be your namesake. I hope you're watching down on me from heaven. I love you.
and my father, Leonel Jeronimo Morocho Morocho, and my aunt, Blanca Robertina Morocho Morocho. Both of you left a void in our hearts and lives, but we know you are in a better place. We miss you and we love you forever and always. And to my dad, I hope my mom, sisters, and I are making you proud. Not one day goes by that we don't.
Jonathan Betts in Beijing.
I'm Asiye Namdar in Washington.
And I'm Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi.
We want to start our special September 11th coverage in the United States with our Asiye Namdar in Washington, D.C. And Asiye, it's been 16 years, but the pain still very fresh for so many.
For so many of us, Jonathan, at this moment, 16 years ago, the New York skyline and the U.S. security policy changed forever. We have some live pictures of commemorations. A fully fueled jetliner crashed into the World Trade Center's North Tower. Minutes later, a second jet crashed into the South Tower. And the next hour, 2 more planes, 2 more targets, one smashing into the Pentagon, the other heading for the U.S. Capitol, crashing into a Pennsylvania field. Nearly 3,000 people lost their lives that day from 90 countries. Today, President Trump called for a moment of silence. In cities hit, somber ceremonies to remember the single deadliest terror attack in world history. My colleague, CGTN's John Terrett, is live for us outside New York's memorial. John, New York has proven its resilience, but boy, those scars still fresh in so many minds and hearts.
You know, Asia, you're absolutely right. They really do run very, very deep in this city, especially on a day like this, 16 years on from a day that would become infamous and go down in the history books forever, when the sun is shining and there's a light breeze, just as it was 16 years ago on 9/11/2001. There is, as I say, a deep sense of unease among New Yorkers, even though much time has passed since the Twin Towers came down. For example, if somebody is walking down the street here and a truck backfires, or even if a jet flies rather too low overhead, people flinch. They're still nervous because of what happened on this day back in 2001. Now, some RCAs say that after 16 years, it's actually time to begin winding down these ceremonies every year, that it might actually be better if they took place, say, only every 5 years, so that the next one might be in 2021, the 20th anniversary of 9/11. But the families who are gathering here at the site of the National 9/11 Memorial are determined that that won't happen. They want to be together with people who also lost loved ones that day every year to remember what happened. So, as they would put it, the world never forgets. And what is happening here at the moment in the sunshine in Lower Manhattan is that dignitaries and families are gathering together, and they've begun reading out the names. It's a very solemn ceremony. It happens every year. It's very emotional. The people who are reading out the names of the loved ones who died are their family members and friends. A lot of them will be in tears. It'll take many hours to do it because there were in total 2,606 people who died here. And some of the families are bringing little mementos to leave around the National Memorial site. They've been told to bring nothing too big, but they're bringing teddy bears and flags and little cards and that sort of thing. RCA?
John, it's now 9:04:35 on the East Coast. At 9:03 a.m., 16 years ago, United Airlines Flight 175, traveling from Boston to Los Angeles, struck the South Tower.
You're right. It was exactly this moment that the South Tower was hit. And I remember I'd been on the air broadcasting the first 12 minutes of the disaster for the BBC. And I came off set and was sitting at my desk just around the corner from the studio. And I saw the second plane go in. And I thought that it was an accident caused by all the planes and helicopters that were then in the sky surrounding the World Trade Center. And another correspondent on the air said, well, that's it then. America's under attack. This is some sort of terrorism. And I remember thinking to myself, that's a big mistake. You've made a big mistake. That was an accident. Of course, it didn't take long for us to realize that it was an attack on the United States. And it was the very moment that the world realized that America was under attack. And of course, those towers continued to spew smoke and debris, which led many years later to an understanding that what was coming out of those towers, especially when they collapsed, led to all sorts of illnesses for first responders, including cancers. RCA?
John Terrett, thank you so much. And less than a month after the September 11th terror attacks, then U.S. President George W. Bush declared war against the Taliban. Within weeks, the U.S. sent thousands of troops to Afghanistan. Peter Vinson joins me in the studio. He's a terrorism expert and former U.S. Department of Homeland Security and U.S. Department of Justice official. Peter, thanks for joining us on the program. What got accomplished in Afghanistan? 16 years later, the Taliban has made a resurgency. I think a lot of people are wondering, what did the war in Afghanistan truly accomplish?
You're right, Asiya. There's been a lot of blood and treasure in Afghanistan. A lot of citizens of the United States, as well as other NATO forces, let alone Afghan citizens that have died in this horrific war trying to root out the Taliban. Unfortunately, the Taliban remains very strong. Al-Qaeda is resurgent. The Islamic State has established somewhat of a foothold there, and the Haqqani network remain very, very violent and very viable. That's not to say, however, that great advances haven't been made. Afghanistan is no longer a completely safe haven for terrorist organizations where they can train and send their operatives across the globe. The United States, along with its NATO allies, have done a great deal of very good work, but the fight is not over.
But Peter, there's almost weekly attacks in Afghanistan. The security situation seems rather volatile still, and if you talk to Afghans, a lot of them will point the finger at the United States. Look at this mess you got us into.
Asiya, the security situation is still quite volatile, and given the geopolitical aspect of Afghanistan and its place on the globe in Central Asia, next to Pakistan, there are still a great deal of threats. And unfortunately, the vast majority of victims that are suffering terrorist attacks are innocent Afghan civilians. The United States has announced most recently, through the Trump administration, a small increase of troops, approximately 4,000, mostly paratroopers and air support, using F-16 fighters, A-10 ground attack, and heavy bombers, B-52s. But the question remains, is the United States prepared to engage in a counterinsurgency, which would require a great deal more troops and diplomats, as opposed to what appears to be the case in a much more limited counterterrorism effort?
Lessons learned since September 11th attacks.
It is a far more complicated dynamic in Afghanistan than I think anyone fully realized. Even individuals that were quite experienced in fighting war and countering terrorism and countering violent extremism realized very quickly that the history of Afghanistan, the so-called graveyard of empires, and the tribal dynamics in Afghanistan make it much more of a very difficult battlefield than I think anyone fully imagined, even after the examples of history.
Military interventions, nation building, do they work?
That is an excellent question, and that was the debate. That was the debate during the George W. Bush administration, and then a very, very serious debate held during the Obama administration. Again, should the United States and its allies be engaged in a counterinsurgency effort meant not only to battle the terrorists on the ground there, to prevent Afghanistan from becoming a safe haven for terrorists, but an effort to win the hearts and minds and provide not just security, but a sense of justice in that particular country, which would assist all peace-loving peoples for decades to come.
Peter, Al-Qaeda seems a bit irrelevant these days. Is this still a force to be reckoned with, or has the chaos and instability in Iraq that formed ISIL, it seems no one is really talking about Al-Qaeda anymore, and everyone is talking about ISIS or ISIL?
Precisely, Asier. In fact, that is quite dangerous. Al-Qaeda remains resurgent. And with all of the focus internationally, not inappropriately, on the barbarism and savagery of the so-called self-proclaimed Islamic State, the focus has been taken a bit off of Al-Qaeda. And the focus on the so-called Islamic State have given both the Taliban and Al-Qaeda a bit more breathing room and a bit more operational space. In addition, ironically and very, very bizarrely, Al-Qaeda is now seen, at least in Afghanistan, as sort of a kinder, gentler version, as opposed to the barbarism of the so-called Islamic State. So Al-Qaeda in this operating space has been able to recruit more adherents, been able to raise more money, and has been able to sort of fly somewhat under the radar as we become a little bit too distracted by the shiny object of the Islamic State's very, very lethal efforts, but some of its over-the-top barbarism.
There's so much more I want to ask you, including influence on the U.S. political climate and Donald Trump's travel ban. We'll get to that later on. And here in Washington, the Pentagon will also pause at 9/11 for a private ceremony with victims' loved ones. That building was hit at 9:37 back in 2001. Jonathan.
Asier, thank you so much. We want to bring in our guest here in studio with some interesting perspectives as well. One is our reporter, Mark Fontes, and the other is Tong Jiun-chun, Director of the Department of American Studies at the China Institute of International Studies. Thank you both for being with us today. So Mark, let me start with you. You were a New Yorker at the time, in school in New York City. What were you most struck by that day?
Just how horrifying all of this was. I mean, seeing the towers on fire and seeing them collapse and noticing the cloud of smoke that pretty much was like an umbrella over lower Manhattan. Class was canceled. I was a senior at St. John's. I remember walking home, seeing a police bus, more than one of them, blue and white NYPD buses full of officers, sirens screaming, must have been going 90, 100 kilometers per hour toward the city. And then also walking over the Grand Central Parkway, one of the major highways that takes people to and from Long Island between there and the city. Eastbound, heading toward the island, it was bumper to bumper gridlock. Everyone was leaving the city. Going the other direction, no traffic whatsoever. You knew that the city had been shut down. You know, the sun was passing over us and it would set on a different world that night. And being there for it was just harrowing. You immediately wanted the country to fight back, but it was just such a harrowing experience, especially being there.
I mean, it's stunning just how much of the world and the country changed in those moments. And I remember afterwards, just the swell of patriotism. I can't imagine the terror also in that city. When did things start to eventually begin to feel like normal in New York?
Not for years, I really say. I mean, I remember in the weeks right after 9/11, every morning, progressively waking up, feeling more and more depressed, thinking that it had all been a bad dream, thinking that one day I was going to look out the window and the Twin Towers would actually be there. You know, that wasn't the case, but I think also two groups of victims that really come to mind were those among the later evacuees to leave the buildings. Many of them walked right past those that had unfortunately jumped to their death. I mean, that's something that not everyone thinks about. Yeah. So, and I even knew a friend of a friend who spent months, if not years, in counseling and therapy because a couple of those people who fell to their death landed just a few meters from her, and so it was very harrowing. And also the other group of victims, families who still have voicemails from people that might have been trapped on the upper floors or even on the planes. That last moment, quite literally, of their lives is still on. Some of these landline phone answering machines have not been deleted. 16 years later, that's kept as a memento. The 9/11 Museum has chronicled a lot of those messages, and it's a very touching experience. I don't think victims who lost someone will ever completely heal. They do say that time heals all wounds, but for a lot of people, this is still a very fresh wound.
Yeah, the scars are absolutely very fresh, and the ripple effects as well that were felt across the world. Mr. Tong, let's talk about that. It launched 2 wars in the Middle East. How has that changed that part of the world?
Yeah, I think the war waged by the United States and its allies in the Middle East and in Afghanistan did change the landscape of international security. For example, in the Middle East, there are several battlefields in Syria, in Iraq, and even in some other countries, the soldiers are still fighting against the terrorist groups, including ISIL and Al-Qaeda. So this is a very important part of the war waged by the international community against the terrorism.
So do you think this war on terror has been a success And if not, how do you even begin to try to measure what is a success?
It's very difficult for us to say it's a successful war against the terrorists, because the terrorists are there for many countries in the country, like the in the Middle East and also in Europe. So this is a long, sustainable war against the terrorism in the international community. So we should be very patient to pay much attention to the terrorists and try our best to fight against these terrorist groups.
So do you feel like the United States and other countries are on the right track in this war and are making progress?
I'm not 100% in favor of such an argument. For example, after the breakup of the traditional balanced power in the Middle East, after the overthrow of Saddam Hussein and other leaders, the United States and the international community, have not yet established a new balance of power and a new, regime or new governments. Even today are very weak. So this is I think the largest challenge for the international community. How can we, restore the balance of power in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, in some other countries, to, maintain the peace and stability in these regions?
And so, I mean, you mentioned that we've seen afterwards that these new governments, these new regimes, but we've also seen these new terror groups. Al-Qaeda is still a threat, Taliban is still a threat, and now we have ISIL. So what kind of challenges do these countries and governments face trying to fight these new groups popping up?
Actually, we have two battlefields. One, for example, in the Middle East, fight against the large groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. These groups are very important for the international community to deal with. And for other battlefield, I mean in the European countries, some individuals just gave some tragic attack against the innocent people in France, in Germany, and even in UK. So we have two a battlefield to fight against the terrorists at this moment. And the international community for the first time should think about the strategy, the policy, and to think about the cooperation. For example, can we have a consensus on the definition of what a terrorism is? We still haven't had such a definition today.
That's a fantastic point. It's hard to kind of label that term and to get a clear idea of what that means because it shifts so often. And Mark, I want to bring you in this conversation as we're looking at live pictures here from Lower Manhattan. This is the ceremony well underway. There will be 6 moments of silence throughout the morning to mark key moments and awful moments of that day when we saw the towers fall.
Yes.
Right now they are reading the names and they will be tolling bells later. But I mean, Mark, you talk about what it's like in New York today. I know you just moved here recently from that area. Do you still feel the impact of 9/11 all these years later?
Absolutely. I know 2 of those moments where bells will toll will be at 9:59 and at 10:28 because those are the times that the towers fell. But the impact felt, it's one of those things that is so poignant, you never really forget what you were feeling that day. I know years ago my father suggested, well, why don't you keep a diary of things like this? It's like, this kind of event, if you were there for it, it never really escapes you. I mean, the details of me walking down Union Turnpike, seeing the police vehicles like I had, or seeing the traffic patterns. I think also the moment that, when I went to donate blood later in the day, I remember the hospital I went to, there was a security guard standing outside. He's like, "Can I see what's in your bag, sir?" And sure enough, I knew that that was the beginning of a new norm that still exists and will for a long time. And today, I feel like New York is a more secure city. I mean, former Police Commissioner Ray Kelly has a very elaborate, or he set up a very elaborate and intricate camera network in Lower Manhattan that monitors things very closely so that we don't have another incident like this, or that we can better prevent it. I feel like New York is more safe and secure. Peace of mind is all kind of in the minds of individuals. I mean, I think some people have more peace of mind than they used to, some don't, but I feel like New York is more safe and secure. It'll never really have that sense of innocence or kind of pre-9/11 mindset that it used to before.
Yeah, it will certainly, this day, 16 years ago, will always hold over that city. Okay, Mark Fontes, thank you so much for your time, as well as Tong Jian Chun, Director of the Department of American Studies at the China Institute of International Studies. Thank you both so much. And as we continue looking at this signal here, as a reminder that today is September 11th, a painful day for so many, 16 years after a darkest day in one of the darkest days in America's history. We're watching the somber ceremony take place where they are reading one by one nearly the 3,000 names of the people who died that day and also died years earlier in the attacks at the World Trade Center back in the early 90s.
Sarah M. Clark.
Thomas R. Clark.
Christopher Robert Clark.
Donna Marie Clark.
Michael J. Clark.
Surya Rachel Emma Clark.
Kevin Francis Cleary.
James D. Clear.
Jeffrey W. Cloud.
Susan Marie Klein.
Stephen Coakley.
Jeffrey Allen Cole.
Patricia A. Cody.
Daniel Michael Coffey.
Jason Matthew Coffey.
Florence G. Cohen.
Kevin S. Cohen.
Anthony Joseph Coladonato.
Mark Joseph Caleo.
Stephen J. Caleo.
Christopher Michael Colasanti.
Kevin Nathaniel Colbert.
Michelle P. Colbert.
Keith E. Coleman.
Scott Thomas Coleman.
So many names and also so much pain. Well, during the memorial ceremony, the people of New York will observe 6 moments of silence to mark the key events of that harrowing September morning back in 2001. Well, certainly the impact of 9/11 has been felt all over the world in the years since. Our Beatrice Marshall is in Nairobi with more on how an attack so many miles away affected so many people in Africa. Beatrice.
Indeed, Jonathan, it has had so much impact here in Africa as well, because since the 9/11 attacks 16 years ago, terrorism in Africa has grown alarmingly. Governments across the continent have had to boost their capacity to deal with attacks, and some more successfully than others. North Africa, for instance, is facing the threat of ISIL militants. In West Africa, Boko Haram continues to cause chaos, and in East Africa, the group Al-Shabaab is responsible for attacks in Somalia and Kenya. But governments have also made great gains against the groups with support from their neighbors and international partners. Well, let's get you more now on the threat of terrorism in East and West Africa. I'm joined live in studio by CGTN's Robert Nagila. Also joining us live from Lagos is CGTN's Deji Badmus. Deji, let me start off with you first, because one of the deadliest terror groups in the world today is in Nigeria, Boko Haram. So what's been the impact of the global trend in terrorism on the country?
Well, you have to look at the impact from the prism of Boko Haram now. Let's look at what Boko Haram has actually done in Nigeria. As we speak today, a particular part of the country, the northeast of the country that used to be the food basket of this country, is now more or less like a basket case itself. So it's a terrible situation. We're looking at a situation where 1.8 million people are now displaced. About 100,000 persons have been killed, depending on the figure you want to take. If you want to take that of the state government, or you want to take that released by the central government, that, you know, not good at all. About 100,000 persons killed. You have millions of people now scattered across different camps in the northeast of the country. And we're talking about the Boko Haram terrorism that has spread beyond Nigeria now. Cameroon is affected, Chad is affected, Niger is affected, and it's threatening to go beyond even West Africa. So the impact is quite horrible. It's costing the Nigerian government so much to deal with the problem. Right. And we're also talking about a problem that is affecting virtually the entire country as well. Even in areas where Boko Haram is not operational, people can actually feel the pangs of the sect. Beatrice?
Right. Robert, Al-Shabaab here in East Africa has caused havoc in Kenya, in Somalia particularly. But we do hear, obviously, both governments of Kenya and Somalia saying they have it under control. Just how potent does that Al-Shabaab group remain?
Well, thank you, Beatrice. Al-Shabaab still remains a very potent threat. Now, over the years, their capability has been diminished somewhat, but they have learned to adapt. For example, they know that the U.S. has satellites, drones. Kenya also has drones, keeping an eye on the situation on the ground. So they've learned to adapt against some of these capabilities being employed by AMISOM member states and the US, which is a major international partner. But we've also seen them still able to carry out deadly attacks, not just at AMISOM bases in Somalia, but incursions into Kenya. One of the worst, the Garissa University massacre, where 147 students were killed, the Westgate upscale mall in Nairobi, where 67 people lost their lives. So they do still present a threat. However, Kenya and other countries in the region have also increased their capabilities in terms of being able to not just detect the level of threat, but be able to carry out overt and covert operations against this group.
Right. Deji, to you very briefly, though, the kidnapping of the Chibok girls in Nigeria gained a global attention. What are the tactics Boko Haram is employing in their insurgency?
Well, when the Boko Haram insurgency started, they started by targeting basically police checkpoints. Later, they graduated into targeting military formations, and before long, they started targeting places of worship. And before we knew what was happening, Boko Haram became a very strong force and was able to take territories, not just take territories, control it for a very long time. In the case of Borno State, that's the state where they actually started from, in the northeast of the country. At some point, they were in control of 23 local government areas in that state out of 27. So not until the Nigerian military now stepped in and recovered those territories. Now what Boko Haram does is to carry out hit and run attacks, lay ambushes on military and civilian convoys, and of course kidnapping has also been one of its tactics. Let's not also forget its deadly suicide bombing campaigns, using, for instance, the UN the other time came out to say this year alone Boko Haram has used around 83 children for its suicide missions, and that 53 or so of them are girls. So these are the MOs, if you like, of Boko Haram, and unfortunately it is still deploying some of these tactics.
Right, Deji Banmos for us there in Lagos, and Robert Nagila bringing us up to speed with the threats of terrorism here in Africa. Well, huge threats there for both regions on the continent, which has fundamentally changed the lives of millions of people. Now, what's needed more than ever are collective efforts to combat terrorism on the continent, and because of the global links, it needs to be a truly international effort. Jonathan?
Yeah, without question, the fight certainly continues. Okay, thanks so much, Beatrice. And we want to go back to Washington, D.C. and our Asiye Namdar with more special coverage of the impact of 9/11. Asiye?
Yes, and we want to talk about how the direct attack thrust the United States into war with troops deployed to Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, the base of operations for the September 11th masterminders, Osama bin Laden. Beatrice?
Asiye, thank you so much. Well, that wraps up our special coverage of the 9/11 memorial ceremony. I'm Jonathan Betts, live in Beijing. Keep it right here, though. There is much more coverage still ahead with Liu Xin and The Point. You are watching CGTN.
Specialist Chin Sun Pack Wells, United States Army. Staff Sergeant Maudlin A. White, United States Army. Sandra L. White. Ernest M. Wilshire. Lieutenant Commander David L. Williams, United States Navy. Major Dwayne Williams, United States Army. Chief Marvin Roger Woods, United States Navy, retired. Captain John Day Yamnicki, Sr., United States Navy, retired. Vicky Yancey. Petty Officer 2nd Class Kevin W. Yoakum, United States Navy. Chief Donald M. Young, United States Navy. Edmund G. Young, Jr. Lisa L. Young.
Arthur de la Penha.
Azucena Marie de la Torre.
Vito Joseph DeLeo.
Daniel Anne DeLay.
Andrea Della Bella.
Joseph A. Della Petra.
Palmina Delegati.
Colleen Anne Delacre.
Joseph DeLuca.
Manuel Del Valle Jr.
Francis Albert DiMartini.
Anthony Damas.
Martin N. DeMeo.
Francis Deming.
Carol Keys Demitz.
Kevin Dennis.
Thomas Francis Dennis Sr.
Jean C. De Palma.
Jose Nicholas De Pena.
Robert John Durrani.
Michael De Rienzo.
David Paul De Rubio.
Jamal Leguest De Santos.
Christian Louise Desmond.
Edward De Simone III.
Andrew De Desperito.
Michael Jude Desposito.
Cindy Ann Duell.
Melanie Louise DeVere.
Jerry DeVito.
Robert P. Devitt Jr.
And my husband Peter Mutos. And thank you to all who serve to keep America safe.
And my brother-in-law, Thomas Swift. Tommy, we love you, we miss you, and we will never forget you.
Dennis Lawrence Devlin.
Gerard P. Dewan.
Suleimanali Kasamali Danani.
Michael Louis D'Agostino.
Matthew Diaz.
Nancy Diaz.
Abdulio Ruiz Diaz.
Michael A. Diaz Piedra III.
Judith Berquise Diaz Sierra.
Patricia Florence Di Chiaro.
Rodney Dickens.
Jerry D. Dickerson.
Joseph Dermoit Dickey Jr.
Lawrence Patrick Dickinson.
Michael D. Deal.
John DeFato.
Vincent Francis DeFazio.
Carl Anthony DeFranco.
Donald Joseph DeFranco.
John DiGiovanni.
Eddie A. Dillard.
Deborah Ann DiMartino.
David DeMeglio.
Stephen Patrick Dimino.
William John Dimling.
Marissa DiNardo Shorp.
Christopher Moore Dincuff.
Jeffrey Mark Dingle.
Rena Sam Deneau.
Anthony Donacio.
George DiPasquale.
Joseph D. Pilato.
Douglas Frank DiStefano.
Donald Americo DiTullio.
Ramsey A. Dewani.
Johnny Dr. Jr.
John Joseph Doherty.
Melissa Candida Doy.
Brendan Dolan.
Robert E. Dolan Jr.
And my father, Calixto Anaya Jr. My hero and my light throughout the darkness that this has caused me.
And my father, Walter A. Matuza Jr. We love you, we miss you, we'll never forget you, and I'm proud to carry your smile through every door I walk through. Thank you.
Neil Matthew Dollard.
James Domenico.
Benilda Pasqua Domingo.
Alberto Dominguez.
Carlos Dominguez.
Jerome Mark Patrick Dominguez.
Kevin W. Donnelly.
Jacqueline Donovan.
William H. Donovan.
Stephen Scott Dorff.
Thomas Dowd,
Kevin Christopher Dowdale,
Mary Yolanda Dowling,
Raymond Matthew Downey Sr.,
Frank Joseph Doyle,
Patrick Joseph Driscoll,
Randall L. Drake,
Charles A. Droz III,
Stephen Patrick Driscoll,
Luke A. Dudek,
Myrna A. Duarte,
Gerard J. Duffy,
Christopher Michael Duffy,
Thomas W. Duffy,
Michael Joseph Duffy,
Jackie Saig Doug,
Antoinette Duger,
Patrick Dunn,
Sarive Ducat,
Christopher Joseph Dunn,
Felicia Gail Dunn Jones,
Patrick Thomas Dwyer,
Richard Anthony Dunstan,
John Bruce Eagleson,
Joseph Anthony Ecobachi,
Robert Douglas Eaton,
Edward T. Earhart,
Margaret Ruth Eckerman,
Dean Philip Eberling,
and my brother Alejandro Castaño. Your niece wrote something for you. A life like yours, not many have seen, but you lived your life like one of the crazy ones that I saw every day as a blessing. You lived life for love and for your family. You were there for every smile, every hardship. Sometimes I see you in others and I believe that you just saying hi. I speak to you constantly because I know you're listening. You had different hats to fill. Being a father, a brother, and an uncle, a son. But you played every part with no effort. It was like you were made for each of those roles. Another year that you are not here, but it's another year that you are at peace. The love that you showed cannot be explained, and each word of wisdom that you gave is still used to this day. We miss you, and I love you. Every year is hard. Your son, you should be very proud of him. He's doing awesome. And mommy and dad, they miss you so much.
and my cousin, Tanyelle F. McDay. I am 16 and I was exactly 11 months old when the attacks took place. Even though I don't remember you holding me when I was a baby, I will never forget you and the memories our family share about you. I will continue to remember and never forget. I know you are enjoying heaven with your mom, granddaddy, Aunt Janice, and Aunt Dora. We love you, Tootie.
Paul Robert Eck.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States and the First Lady. please face the flag for our national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so the bombs bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Ladies and gentlemen, the United States Air Force Chief of Chaplains, Major General Dondi Costin.
Let us pray together. Heavenly Father, we bow our heads this morning with our feet fixed on sacred soil, consecrated on September 11, 2001, by 184 innocents who perished in an instant, but whose legacies will never die. Whereas Moses was commanded from a burning bush on holy ground to rescue his countrymen from their oppressors, our generation was commissioned from a burning building on this site to do the same. For the nearly 3,000 who lost their lives that day, we remember. For family members who deal with their loss to this day, we pray. For first responders who helped others live to see another day, we rejoice. For those who witnessed this shot heard round the world and suited up for combat to seize the day, we thank you on this Patriot Day. Thank you for giving our freedom fighters enough grace to stand firm, enough grit to stand tall, and enough guts to stand up to anyone gullible enough to assume America would ever stand down. Standing here in the shadow of their sacrifices, please transform the raw emotion of this ceremony into righteous action worthy of their service. The scriptures tell us that one day we'll turn our swords into plowshares and delete combat from our dictionaries once and for all. But until that prophesied peace persists, Lord, help us demonstrate due diligence, not only in the quantity of our vigils, but in the quality of our vigilance in keeping bad guys on the run. When complacency creeps in, give us the skill to succeed. When fear calls, give us the will to win. When differences divide, unite us in a common cause. And when doubt appears, fill us with the faith to know that this cause, liberty, is clearly worth the cost. In closing, Lord, we pause now for a moment of silent reflection. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph F. Dunford, Jr.
Mr. President, Mrs. Trump, Secretary Mattis, members of the Cabinet, distinguished guests, and most importantly, to the family and friends of the fallen, and to those gathered here who survived the attack on the Pentagon, good morning. It's an honor to join you as we pause to reflect all those who lost their lives on September 11th, 2001. At this ceremony, we're particularly mindful of the 184 who died here in the halls of the Pentagon and aboard Flight 77. 16 years ago, when terrorists attacked the Pentagon, the World Trade Center, and as they attempted other attacks in Washington, D.C., they did so with a sense of purpose. They were attacking symbols that reflect our way of life and our values. The terrorists believed that these attacks would shake our commitment to those values. And as President Bush said hours after the attacks, the terrorists thought they could frighten us into chaos and retreat. But they were wrong. Instead of retreat, the tragedy of 9/11 produced in us an unyielding resolve. Instead of hopelessness, our mourning turned into action. And we have strengthened our commitment to the idea that the freedom of many should never be endangered by the hatred of a few. So this morning, as we recall the events of 9/11, it's appropriate for those of us still serving to remember and honor those who died, those who continue suffering from injuries, and those left behind. But if we truly want to honor those remembered today, each of us will walk away from this ceremony with a renewed sense of commitment to our values and the cause of freedom. Each of us will walk away from this simple ceremony reminded that the war is not over and that further sacrifice will be required. And each of us will walk away with resolve to strengthen our personal commitment to protect our family, friends, and fellow citizens from another 9/11. It's now my privilege to introduce someone who has spent his life demonstrating personal commitment to protecting our values and our way of life, our Secretary of Defense, the Honorable James Mattis.
Well, thank you, General Dunford. Mr. President, Mrs. Trump, our First Lady, fellow secretaries of the President's Cabinet, distinguished guests, first responders, ladies and gentlemen, and a special heartfelt welcome to the 306 family members gathered to remember their loved ones lost 16 years ago today. We are here to honor those 2,977 lives claimed by the brutal attacks of September 11, 2001. Men and women who woke that day never anticipating an attack on their place of work or against this country. Innocents who hailed from 90 nations and all walks of life. Attackers perpetrating murder that fateful day. But heroism and compassion were boundless on 9/11. Patriots from all backgrounds and all walks of life responded with speed, with courage, and with compassion. In the aftermath of the attack, our service members, our nation, rallied together as one. For while we had never asked for this fight, we are steadfastly committed to seeing it through, as President Trump has made abundantly clear. And with no more temporizing, as our example of leadership galvanizes other nations to stand united against this threat to all humankind. Maniacs disguised in false religious garb thought by hurting us they could scare us that day. But we, Americans, are not made of cotton candy. We are not seaweed drifting in the current. We are not intimidated by our enemies, and Mr. President, your military does not scare. Our nation's troops today are worthy successors of our Revolutionary Army at Valley Forge, worthy successors of our valiant sailors at Midway and our Marines at Bloody Iwo Jima, and of our Air Force pilots patrolling Mig Alley. Men and women of your armed forces, America, having signed a blank check to the protection of the American people and to the defense of our Constitution, a check payable with their very lives, your military stand ready and confident to defend this country, this experiment in democracy. And we will continue to do so using all means necessary and as long as necessary. So today we remember the loss of so many in New York City, in a somber field in Pennsylvania, and here in this very building behind me, and in many battles since, and some of those battles are still raging. As former Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld observed, on 9/11 every year, we again are mindful and resolute that their deaths, like their lives, shall have meaning, and that is in how we carry forward our responsibility to protect America. To the families of those who perished, the loss you have endured drives us in our mission today and every day. And it's in that spirit, ladies and gentlemen, that it's my honor to introduce our Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, Donald Trump.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you, Secretary Mattis, General Dunford, members of the Cabinet, members of the armed forces, first responders, and most importantly, to the families and to the survivors. It's an honor to join you on this very, very solemn location. This is an occasion that is extraordinary, and it'll always be extraordinary. Before we begin, I'd like to send our nation's prayers to everyone in the path of Hurricanes Irma and to everyone suffering through the devastation of Hurricane Harvey. These are storms of catastrophic severity, and we're marshaling the full resources of the federal government to help our fellow Americans in Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Louisiana, Tennessee, and all of those wonderful places and states in harm's way. When Americans are in need, Americans pull together, and we are one country. And when we face hardship, we emerge closer, stronger, and more determined than ever. We're gathered here today to remember a morning that started very much like this one. Parents dropped off their children at school. Travelers stood in line at airports and getting ready to board flights. Here at the Pentagon and at offices all across the country, people began their early meetings. Then our whole world changed. America was under attack, first at the World Trade Center, then here at the Pentagon, and then in Pennsylvania. The horror and anguish of that dark day were seared into our national memory forever. It was the worst attack on our country since Pearl Harbor, and even worse because this was an attack on civilians, innocent men, women, and children whose lives were taken so needlessly. For the families with us on this anniversary, we know that not a single day goes by when you don't think about the loved one stolen from your life. Today, our entire nation grieves with you, and with every family of those 2,977 innocent souls who were murdered by terrorists 16 years ago. Each family here today represents a son or daughter, a sister or brother, a mother or father who was taken from you on that terrible, terrible day. But no force on earth can ever take away your memories, diminish your love, or break your will to endure and carry on and go forward. Though we can never erase your pain or bring back those you lost, we can honor their sacrifice by pledging our resolve to do whatever we must to keep our people safe. On that day, not only did the world change, but we all changed. Our eyes were opened to the depths of the evil we face. But in that hour of darkness, we also came together with renewed purpose. Our differences never looked so small. Our common bonds never felt so strong. The sacrifice grounds on which we stand today are a monument to our national unity and to our strength. For more than 7 decades, the Pentagon has stood as a global symbol of American might, not only because of the great power contained within these halls, but because of the incredible character of the people who fill them. They secure our freedom. They defend our flag. And they support our courageous troops all around the world. Among the 184 brave Americans who perished on these grounds were young enlisted service members, dedicated civil servants who had worked here for decades, and veterans who served our nation in Korea, in Vietnam, and in the Middle East. All of them loved this country and pledged their very lives to protect it. That September morning, each of those brave Americans died as they had lived, as heroes, doing their duty and protecting us and our country. We mourn them, we honor them, and we pledge to never, ever forget them. We also remember and cherish the lives of the beloved Americans who boarded Flight 77 at Dulles Airport that morning. Every one of them had a family, a story, and beautiful dreams. Each of them had people they loved and who loved them back. And they all left behind a deep emptiness that their warmth and grace once filled so fully and so beautifully. The living, breathing soul of America wept with grief for every life taken on that day. We shed our tears in their memory, pledged our devotion in their honor, and turned our sorrow into an unstoppable resolve to achieve justice in their name. The terrorists who attacked us thought they could incite fear and weaken our spirit. But America cannot be intimidated, and those who try will soon join the long list of vanquished enemies who dared to test our mettle. In the years after September 11th, more than 5 million young men and women have joined the ranks of our great military to defend our country against barbaric forces of evil and destruction. American forces are relentlessly pursuing and destroying the enemy's all civilized people, ensuring, and these are horrible, horrible enemies, enemies like we've never seen before. But we're ensuring that they never again have a safe haven to launch attacks against our country. We are making plain to these savage killers that there is no dark corner beyond our reach, no sanctuary beyond our grasp, and nowhere to hide anywhere on this very large earth. Since 9/11, nearly 7,000 service members have given their lives fighting terrorists around the globe. Some of them rest just beyond this fence, in the shrine to our nation's heroes, on the grounds of Arlington National Cemetery. They came from all backgrounds, all races, all faiths, but they were all there to dedicate their lives, and they defend our one great American flag. They and every person who puts on the uniform has the love and gratitude of our entire nation. Today, as we stand on this hallowed ground, we are reminded of the timeless truth that when America is united, no force on earth can break us apart. No force. On the morning of 9/11, Pentagon police officer Isaac Hopel and a special person was one of the many heroes whose love for his fellow Americans knew no bounds. He was a mile away when he got the call over his radio that a plane had crashed into the Pentagon. He sped to the scene and raced into smoke and fire. Few people would have done it. He ducked under live electrical wires and trudged through puddles of jet fuel, only steps away from sparks and from vicious flame. In the pitch black, he began calling out people in need of help. Isaac heard faint voices, and he wanted to answer those faint voices. One by one, he carried people out of the burning rubble. He kept going back into the smoldering darkness, calling out to anyone who could hear, anyone who was alive. He saved as many as 20 people who had followed his voice. He carried 8 himself. For nearly 36 hours, Isaac kept on saving lives, serving our nation, and protecting our safety in our honor and our hour of need. And today, Isaac continues to do exactly that. Isaac still works at the Pentagon, now as a sergeant. He's on duty right now, and he's joined us here today for the ceremony. And this morning, all of us and all of America thank Isaac for his service. Where is Isaac? Thank you. Thank you, Isaac. Thank you. To Isaac and to every first responder and survivor of the attack you carry on the legacy of the friends you lost, you keep alive the memory of those who perished, and you make America proud. Very, very proud. To the family members with us today, I know that it's with a pained and heavy heart that you come back to this place. But by doing so, by choosing to persevere through the grief, the sorrow, you honor your heroes. You renew our courage, and you strengthen all of us. You really do. You strengthen all of us. Here on the west side of the Pentagon, terrorists tried to break our resolve. It's not going to happen. But where they left a mark, with fire and rubble, Americans defiantly raised the Stars and Stripes, our beautiful flag that for more than 2 centuries has graced our ships, flown in our skies, and led our brave heroes to victory after victory in battle. The flag that binds us all together as Americans, who cherish our values and protect our way of life. The flag that reminds us today of who we are, what we stand for, and why we fight. Woven into that beautiful flag is the story of our resolve. We have overcome every challenge, every single challenge, every one of them. We've triumphed over every evil and remained united as one nation under God. America does not bend. We do not waver, and we will never, ever yield. So here at this memorial, with hearts both sad and determined, we honor every hero who keeps us safe and free, and we pledge to work together, to fight together, and to overcome together every enemy and obstacle that's ever in our path. Our values will endure. Our people will thrive. Our nation will prevail, and the memory of our loved ones will never, ever die. Thank you. May God bless you. May God forever bless the great United States of America. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.